Good morning, everyone. It is Mr. E here, and I have an extra deep voice because it's so early in the damn day. I am fortunately blessed with recording for Ogryn today, and Ogryn has a nice deep voice. He protects the little ones, etc., etc., so I think it's very fitting. Let's first off talk about his base stats, because that's where I start with all these guys. Firstly, health, 300. That's a big chunk of health. It's plenty of health that, honestly, a lot of times I find myself not even needing to take any health curios. Now, that might seem counterintuitive because those health curios would allow you to stack to like 520 HP or so, but he has this problem where he gets attacked by ranged things a lot, and so stacking toughness on him protects us from a lot of that ranged attack damage. The only situation I think I might choose health over toughness on him these days is when you have Indomitable as your gap closer, and you can really just get in there and ignore taking most of that range damage. But even then, having more toughness is great because he has some really exceptional talents for jumping his toughness back up to full after he takes a single hit, which make it very hard for enemies to get through and actually damage his massive health. And don't forget that you could also put health as the secondary stat on your curios and take an extra 15% that way. And that, that's like that's 45 health on its own. So not a bad option either. In any case, I think the debate between health and toughness for him is up in the air for most players. For damage reductions, sprinting, sliding, and dodging are all full damage, and this goes into his main weakness as a class, and a lot of the reason why people that play him early on when they're starting to learn Darktide kind of feel a little bit beat down, because they are getting a little bit of an extra beat down compared to some of the other classes. He also suffers from, I say suffer, that's not a terrible suffrage, but he has a sprint speed of only 5, the slower of the two sets of sprint speeds in the game, tied with Psyker, and fortunately, he has a lot of stamina and a good depleted sprint modifier, so he can sprint a good long distance. The problem with his stamina is that he has a 1 second regeneration delay, which is tied with Veteran for the slowest, and then he has only 1 per second, which means it's going to take him 5 full seconds to regenerate that 4 stamina, and then even more, if he's got more stamina on his weapons stuff, which you always do, right? So a lot of times you can enter into melee combat because you sprint at a good distance and you won't find yourself having any stamina to do a shove or something with immediately. Fortunately, the Ogryn doesn't need a whole lot of stamina because generally he doesn't tend to do a whole lot of blocking in combat, and he also doesn't do a whole lot of push stabs. Now, push stabs are great on other classes because they offer a little bit of extra stagger followed by an attack that can hit the staggered enemy, but Ogryn's push stabs generally aren't like anything to write home about on any of the weapons that he has. The real bread and butter is just heavy attacks on Ogryn, and they have so much stagger on their own. Why do you need to push if you could just push them with the edge of a shield or something that's going to also almost kill the enemy? And then he has a very low crit chance, but that's perfectly okay because I can't really think of any builds that revolve around getting crits. He's got this low crit, but he's got a couple ways of getting crit in his tree, such as some stuff in Burst Limiter Override and Massacre if we really need it, but his damage is not crit dependent, unlike Psyker and Zealot. Okay, well, let's go ahead and address the Ogryn in the room, which is what I think the main issue is with Ogryn and why he is the least played class in the game. And I think it really simply comes down to Ogryn is different. He's built different than the other classes, and you have to play by different rules. And it can feel when you're especially a new player and you don't understand all the mechanics for dodging attacks, and you don't know the map layouts, and you haven't quite yet figured out like, oh yeah, let's take this approach to the enemies. If you're caught out in the open as the Ogryn, it can really feel like you're being picked on. Every enemy in the world is targeting you, and you have no evasive mechanisms to get out of it. He can get kind of locked down. Thankfully, they did fix the problems where he would just get infinitely staggered by gunners and such. Now he can just kind of wade through that damage, but it still feels bad to take a bunch of free damage that other classes can dodge away from. And he also has really lackluster dodges because his dodges are not scaled to his overall size. So if you think about like the amount that he actually displaces his feet is roughly the same as the other classes. However, his actual body mass doesn't move that much between, between the positions where he was dodging, so it can be very difficult comparatively to dodge things like dogs and mutants and trapper nets. So I think that roughly explains the problem that a lot of players have with Ogryn. I'm not saying by any means that he isn't a very strong class, it's just you need to exhibit a different set of skills to play well with Ogryn than you do all 3 of the other classes. I think Psyker among the other classes is the standout in terms of having a completely different playstyle, or at least a radically different playstyle than the Veteran and the Zealot do, who are I think like the standard for the game. And then Ogryn has like his own set of like, oh, I can't do that. Whereas other classes could skirt this whole area and not have any enemies shooting at them. The Ogryn's going to have all the enemies shooting at him. However, I think the devs accounted for this, and this is something I do want to say about Ogryn, which is that he is just... the community around the Ogryn is just so amazing. There is some sort of like mimetic mind virus that spreads to Ogryn players that makes them all roleplay as Ogryns and just generally be like helpful and happy people, seemingly, or at least that's the ones that are talking in game. So I really love that. I think it's really cute for Ogryns. And they also have a really great community, and this is where I want to say that I don't even have 100 levels in Ogryn yet, so all of my Ogryn opinions are to be taken with a grain of salt. I'm going to be recommending stuff based on some very good Ogryns I have played with, and also from a great resource that if you were interested in playing Ogryn, I think you should access, which is the Steam community guide called the Ogrynomicon. I'm showing it on the screen right now. You can just go Google search for the Ogrynomicon, or find it on Steam, on the workshop, or the community guide section, and it also has a downloadable PDF. The people who put the work into this, these 3 people right here, are clearly obsessed with the Ogryn class. They are incredibly devoted to having the ultimate encyclopedia of Ogryn knowledge, and it really is all here. Literally all the breakdowns of his skills, as well as their ratings on the skills, how to play as him, how to use all of his different weapons, recommendations for perks and blessings on the weapons, and then finally some builds and stuff down the bottom, as well as blessings and curios. So really all the information you can need to get a good start on Ogryn. I've certainly played with a couple of these builds in my videos, and these are probably the best builds you're going to get, barring like 1 or 2 tweaks that are up to your own personal flavor. But this is the ultimate repository for Ogryn class knowledge. If you are looking to become Ogryn, to become one of them, go check that out. I highly encourage it. All right. Well, speaking of things I highly encourage, I highly encourage you to, if you enjoy the content so far, if you enjoy Katamari music or Ogryns or whatever it is that's brought you this far into the video, to head down there and give a comment and a like and perhaps a subscription. I am pushing for 100 subscribers each day between now and 2025. If I do so, we'll hit 10,000 subs within the year, which would be insane. And we're on track, so I would be really eager if you would do that for me. I would greatly appreciate it. And perhaps you can come check out one of my streams sometimes. I don't really have a set schedule so far, but I had 70 people watching last night, and it was great fun for all involved. Let's go ahead and get into his talent tree, shall we? So, starting right here at the top of the tree, we've got 2 different ways of regenerating toughness for the Ogryn. Now, of the 2, the best defense is the weaker, simply because the best defense requires you to hit multiple enemies with a single heavy melee attack, which is going to happen quite often. However, it requires you to take Furious beforehand, and Furious is not that strong of a node, comparatively to plenty of other damage increases to heavy attacks that we get in the tree, so it will require 2 nodes to get to. And it necessitates having multiple enemies to hit with the heavy melee attack, versus the Smash 'em node here, which only requires you to hit a single melee enemy. Now, you won't get that buff if you do hit more than 1 enemy, but it's always fairly easy as the Ogryn to pick out a single enemy to hit with a heavy melee attack, usually by hitting over the heads of trash enemies at an elite enemy or someone taller. And this also has very good value against things like bosses. You can just straight up face tank most of the bosses in the game by just repeatedly heavy attacking them, because they won't be able to break through this amount of toughness regeneration the fast you heavy attack. It also follows behind taking one of the best passives and easiest pickups on the whole tree, Heavyweight. In fact, 99% of builds are going to come through this node right here, because this is 30% damage against all the big boys in the game and 30% less damage taken from them. I mean, if any other class had this, it would be insane, and this scales some of our damage against these enemies that are going to take more than one hit to kill. Linchpin, what a great node as well. We're going to be in coherency with our allies 99% of the time. We just don't have the mobility to be like pushing ahead of them, and we're intended as sort of like the the anchor for the team, right? That's how I like to play my Ogryns anyway, and it's pretty easy to stay in coherency with the Ogryn. So you're going to get 50% extra toughness replenishment, which is never bad. And then we're going to come down here and look at our 3 blitzes. Now, Ogryn has some of the best blitzes in the game. 2 of them I think are just absolutely busted. Great. One of them is good in most situations, and the 2 that are just so busted are these 2 on the left: Big Friendly Rock and Bombs Away. The rock is unique. It's in a realm all of its own. The only downside I could say about the rock is it does take a second to pull it out, but experienced Ogryns that know when to rock and when to keep it in their pocket are just pulling that thing out whenever they hear a mutant sound, or whenever there's, traversing through a little bit of a downtime in an area, So you get one of these every 45 seconds, and you start with 4. So you're actually going to be able to throw about like 45 of these in a 30-minute game, which is kind of nuts. That's a lot of damage, as I like to say, and it's really just useful. I mean, it's a great stagger. It's a knockdown on even the biggest enemies. And it's just instant kills on specials and elites and stuff like that. Ogryns that know how to wield this thing, you're going to get a lot of value out of it, and you won't tax your team for any of the grenade things. However, if you do want to tax your team for grenade kits, Bombs Away is a great choice. I think this is the one that I go for on most of my builds, because its disruptive factor is so huge. A lot of times the situations that get kind of hairy, where your team might get kind of fucked up, or like you need to get a rescue and you don't want to take a whole lot of damage, the rock isn't going to do a whole lot for you in those situations, but Bombs Away absolutely will. Now, if you're as veteran of a player as I am at this game, you remember when this was the only talent the Ogryn had for Blitz, and there was modifiers to it. Thankfully, they've made changes, and now literally if you hit any enemy, it explodes and releases all those grenades. The stagger from the initial hit is great, and then each one of those grenades that explodes around it also staggers and knockdowns and does a really good amount of damage. This just causes so much chaos in a pretty good area. I think this is the ultimate disruptor ability, and I'm never upset to see one of these thrown into a hairy situation. A variant on that is the Frag Bomb, which I think is kind of the one that does stand out here as a little bit weaker, only because it only has 1 charge, right? And it does good damage. It will level everything except for like the strongest of enemies. But again, that only 1 use, and having to take a whole nother grenade kit in order to get that, or wait for a lucky proc from veteran if they're running that talent, does kind of hold it back a little bit. But this does feel awesome to use. If these other 2 are S tier, this one is A tier. No shade if you want to take the Frag Bomb. It is perfectly usable and does the same effect of like turning around a bad situation in an instant. Then we've got 2 choices down here. The one you want to take in most situations, if you go rock, you have to go over here. But if you are the other 2, you can take Soften Them Up, which is the good one. This is, as far as I know, this is only applicable to melee damage the enemies take from you, but it makes them take 15% more damage. As we'll talk about as we get into Ogryn further, Ogryn has lots of talents and blessings that allow him to increase the damage that enemies take, which is exceptional, because there's plenty of classes like Psyker who can use Scryer's Gaze and boost their damage to absurd levels. But when you multiply that by an enemy that's also receiving extra damage, you get really big numbers. People who play Path of Exile know what I'm talking about. When you're at endgame, you don't just want to stack damage on you want to stack resistance debuffs on the enemies so they take increased damage. So that's what this is, and there's a couple other ones of those in the tree. Now we've got to talk about the abilities. And Ogryn is, again, blessed for some pretty damn good abilities, especially Indomitable, which I think is sort of the paragon for a good ability for the Ogryn. This is the best one in my approximation, because it deals with his main weakness of not being able to close that distance without taking too much damage. He can just get in there, and it knocks everything down, including crushers, including bulwarks. It staggers back bosses. It only has a 30-second cooldown, and it gives you this lovely attack speed and movement speed steroid afterwards that can also stack with get stuck in, so you're moving super fast in the immediate aftermath of this charge, so you can zip around and clobber everyone to death while they're on the ground. I would definitely recommend taking Trample, Stomping Boots and Trample. This is just such a game-changing ability. This is where Ogryn has his greatest ability to like turn around bad situations. You can take a situation where you're completely overwhelmed, outnumbered, and outgunned, and put yourself in an advantageous situation by simply getting a good rush through all of these enemies, putting them on the ground, then turning around, and you'll have 50%, 1.5 times your damage, and you'll bludgeon everyone to death while they're on the ground. With replenished toughness and all that good stuff. What a great ability. If you were going for melee focused stuff, highly recommend. The middle talent tree is also really good. I mean, all these are pretty good, but the middle talent tree is also really good. This is a great support skill for the team. It taunts enemies, makes them attack only you. Within 8 meters, you can get it up to 12 meters, which is a really long radius. And you can also take valuable distraction, which is what I recommend. Having these enemies take 25% base damage. Again, another damage taken increase for enemies. It makes enemies so soft. If you taunt them with this and then hit them once with soften them up, enemies are taking 40% more damage. This applies to bosses and all that good stuff too. It's just such a great way to wipe out high priority targets for your team or help them to. And then the big lungs thing, having that extra radius, the farther away you taunt an enemy from, the more value you get out of this, because it's going to make them stop what they're doing, and then they have to walk 12 meters to get to you. So if they're already attacking your ally and you pull them away from a really long distance, they spend all that time doing nothing. They're not even attacking you. They're just walking, and that can be really good, especially if there's plenty of obstacles between you and them. I love this ability because it does something unique in the game in that it takes control of the battlefield. And I think it's something Ogryn really excels in. The one sort of ability that doesn't do that sort of thing, but is very fun in its own right, is Point Blank Barrage. The way I see it, there's 2 different sort of builds you can go this. You can go with the fast firing weapons like the Ripper Gun or the Twin Link Stubbers. That's very fun, especially with light 'em up on some of the Twin Link Stubbers. You can burn bosses to death in a second. Or you can go single shot, quick reloads, which my favorite build with this is the kickback with the hail of fire with having the extra rending, and then you can just you can do a double shot with the shotgun by going kickback, and then pressing this, and you'll instantly reload and you'll be able to shoot a second one. That allows you, this rending also allows you to just pop crushers and stuff with it. What a fun ability to just go into a drawdown mode and murder everything with for a little while. Now we do have some good choices down here. If you're over here on this right side of the tree, especially if you're taking Point Blank Barrage and you need ammo, you'll want to come through Ammo Stash. This other talent Pacemaker here is not that big a deal, but Ammo Stash is very nice. But on this left side of the tree, you absolutely want to get Batter. Crunch is a bit of a bait. It does require you to fully charge your melee attacks, and that takes a deceptively long time. It's even longer than Thrust on a lot of weapons. So you'll get the full 3 stacks of Thrust, and you still won't have the Crunch benefit. So Batter is the really the way to go. And Ogryn has so much strength down here in the tree too that you do want to reserve those points. You don't want to blow your load, so to speak, up here in the tree. So Batter is really excellent because these bleed stacks that you're inflicting are going to be doing extra damage because of things like Soften Them Up and Loyal Protector if you have it, and as well as Trample. So these bleeds are like super bleeds, and it's really easy to get bleeds on tons of enemies as Ogryn, just because his heavy attacks sweep wide areas and they're very effective in general. This middle area here, I don't know if I've ever really seen anyone going for builds that come down the middle here. This just generally isn't that impressive, because 1% damage on your next heavy melee attack. Remember, we've got like 40% heavy melee damage down here in the tree, so that extra damage is not necessary, and we want to save points for things like batter or that ammo stash if we're going for an ammo heavy build. All 3 of his auras, he suffers from having kind of weak-ish auras. Bonebreakers is okay, as is Stay Close. Stay Close is the best of the 3 in my approximation, but it's locked behind the worst prerequisite talent point, and then Coward Culling is just kind of nothing. 20% damage against suppressed enemies is like, yeah, I don't, enemies very often aren't suppressed in this game, they're just outright killed. So, but most builds are going to go through Bonebreaker's aura, which is fine, but it is nothing impressive in my book. Alright, we're in the run-ups to the final Keystones. So over here, we've got Delight and Destruction. Remember, we're applying bleeds to all enemies on heavy melee hits, and this is what an excellent talent to go with that. It's going to give us 48% damage resistance, not just toughness damage resistance, but health and toughness damage resistance. That's going to extend our health bar, basically double our effective health as long as we have this resistance up, right? It really, it doesn't actually say how, it's per bleeding. So as long as the enemies are bleeding, it's not even a duration. Obviously enemies are going to die, but yeah, this allows us to deal with longer engagements with, crushers and maulers and things like that aren't going to die immediately to our attacks. What a great node. Then we've got 10 seconds of rending on elite kill. This is, again, a more valuable perk the higher level of gameplay you're playing on because there's more elites available, and it's 10 seconds, so you're going to keep this thing up pretty much full time. That rending is surprisingly valuable for us because those bleeds penetrate armor a lot better with 10% extra rending. It's like 20% extra damage on those things. We've also got to talk about Too Stubborn to Die. This is a all or nothing talent. You get nothing out of it unless you are below 33% health, but when you are, it becomes very, very powerful. It used to be below 25% health. They did make a buff to it. 33% health means that with the base 3 wounds that you have as Ogryn on the highest difficulties, you'll have this going if you're on your last wound. And I think that's a really nice compromise. You could play a style where you get yourself down this low and then you have this super toughness replenishment. His toughness replenishment is really good as it is, but let me give you an example. If you have full stacks of heavy hitter and you have unstoppable, it turns your toughness replenish from killing a melee enemy from 5% to 10%. And if we hit a single melee enemy with Smash 'em, we're getting 20% toughness. So let's assume a situation where we hit a single melee enemy and kill them with a heavy melee attack. We would gain a 30% toughness just from that alone. If you had Too Stubborn to Die active and you hit and killed a single enemy with a heavy melee attack, you would gain 60% of your toughness back in one heavy melee. That's the sort of strength this node has. However, it does have the prerequisite of needing to be on low HP to do it. But a low HP for Ogryn is like full HP for anyone else. No stopping me, I think it's pretty much useless. I don't even know if I've ever been interrupted during a heavy melee attack as Ogryn. It's probably only the heaviest like maulers and crusher overheads that can actually interrupt you. I've never been interrupted by anything smaller than that, so I don't understand taking that. You especially want to go this right side. So you could take Too Stubborn to Die, but definitely come down this right side if you're building into heavy hitter stuff. We've also got Implacable, which is more damage reduction. Remember, Ogryn is not a class like Zealot, where you can dodge all the damage and then deal your own damage in retaliation. You're simply too big to effectively dodge out of the way of enemies, and his weapons like the shield and stuff only have 2 dodge count anyway. So you're just going to take a hit, and that's okay, because we have a ton of damage resistance, and we have a ton of ways to replenish our toughness, and this is more damage resistance in that case, and we're going to follow up by killing that enemy in one hit. Heavy Hitter is probably my favorite Keystone for him. This just gives you straight up 25% heavy attack damage. It lasts for a long time. It's really easy to stack up. It is on hit, so you can hit multiple enemies and get this stacked up as far as I remember. I might be wrong on that. Comment if I'm wrong. And then we've also got Just Getting Started. You do want to take this if you're doing this, because 10% attack speed on the Ogryn's slow base attack speeds is a lot. It really, really adds up and gets more bleeds in the field. And then Unstoppable is the other one you want to take. This is just more sustain for the Ogryn's toughness, and we love that. Brutish Momentum is the one you'll probably want to skip on this Keystone. You don't need to be refreshing this duration with light attacks. In fact, very few Ogryn builds use light attacks and heavy attacks. Usually it's just kind of one or the other. If you're using Carsolus Pickaxe or Cleaver, you're light attacking. If you're doing heavy attacks, shield or the bully mace, you're going for heavy attacks. All right, and then we've got the middle tree here. These two rows up here are full of really nice stuff. Specifically, these right two get stuck in. Like I said earlier, it's going to boost yourself and your allies, give yourselves some nice movement speed, y'all, and immunity to stuns and suppression for 4 seconds. This is great because when we activate some of these abilities, actually all of these abilities, we really want to be able to reposition for movement speed. You know, we can pull enemies farther away with Loyal Protector, or we can get on top of enemies and beat them to death with Indomitable, or it allows us to strafe more while we're shooting with point blank barrage. So that's always very nice, and it allows your allies to catch up to you too, especially if you did a big deep charge and went deep with that Indomitable. Bruiser is such a great ability. They nerfed it by 1%. It's only 4% combat ability cooldown. But remember, this is when you kill an elite enemy, so it scales with difficulty. So you're going to get a lot of your cooldown back, and you should absolutely be taking this on, I think, on every Ogryn build, as far as I'm concerned. You'll have the points to get to it, and you need cooldown reduction because all these abilities, except for Indomitable, kind of have fairly long cooldowns, and that stacks with Psychokinetic Aura from the Psyker, so you can get like 9% back, which is really nice. Attention Seeker is another really great node because you can kind of break enemies' AI. Just giving a simple block or a push to enemies taunts them, gets them off of your allies. It changes the rules of engagement, and it can really make some situations where your allies are getting overwhelmed way better for them. I think it's kind of a defining node for the Ogryn. Payback time, like we were talking earlier, you are going to take hits as the Ogryn, so this activates quite frequently. You're going to take a hit or two while you're charging up your heavy melee attack often, and then you're going to retaliate with 20% extra damage, so never bad. Coming down here, this used to be the obvious choice on the right side, but they reworked to no pushover. I don't really go into the middle tree that much. It's not my favorite. My favorite tree is this one, but this is the absolute tank tree, and no pushover is very funny to use. It is so much stagger, just straight up shoving everything down. Unfortunately, only once every 8 seconds. I think that could be like once every 6 seconds or something instead, but it is useful. And you know, if you have this with Attention Seeker, which you probably do, you're going to push this enemy to the ground, and they're going to have to wait to get up, and then they're taunted, right? So it's kind of a nice perk, especially if you're going tanky mode. Now, speaking of tanky mode, we got to talk about Feel No Pain. Feel No Pain gives you 25% toughness replenishment and damage reduction. You know, and you lose these stacks every time you take damage, including, you know, just chip damage to your toughness. Now, you gain 1 stack every 3 seconds, so it takes 30 seconds to fully stack this thing up. Unless, and you should be taking this, you take Strongest, because Strongest just allows you to push an enemy and it restores one stack. So if you run out of stacks at the end of a combat encounter, you just find that one lone shitty enemy and you just push them into the wall repeatedly and then beat their head to death. That's going to give you all your stacks back, and there you go. You got Pained Outburst. This one is limited by having that effect only occur once every 30 seconds. The knockback is nice, and replenishing a little bit of toughness is nice, but remember, we replenish 20% toughness every time we literally swing our weapon, so I don't think it's anything to write home about. But Feel No Pain can be very nice. It's going to give us an additional 25% toughness replenishment, which is going to stack with all of our other toughness replenishment, so you might take that. But I think the real bread and butter here is Strongest. And then finally our right side tree. Now this right side tree is probably the one that needs the most work. You know, if you are a burst limit or override fan, let me know in the comments if maybe I'm missing some sort of edge use case for it. I know it's very effective with rapid fire weapons, but it's only a 8% or 12% if you take the augment node chance to activate that free damage, and that's just not very much on like single shot weapons and things like that. And 12% free damage, as well as the extra cooldown stuff it provides, it really isn't honestly worth the trade-off for the extra tankiness or the extra insane melee damage you gain from these other two trees. So even when I'm playing a gunner focused build, I often end up taking one of these two because it improves your overall survivability, and you'll get by without that extra little bit of damage. The nodes at the top are also not that impressive. They are like situationally useful. 50% coherency radius ain't half bad, so that's a good 1 point dip. 20% movement speed also ain't half bad, because especially if you're using point blank barrage, you might want to be repositioning between shots if you're using kickback, or it's going to allow you again to strafe fire with get stuck in. You'll get a lot of movement speed if you have all three of these, right? And you can run around with your twin stubber and kind of strafe the enemy like you're in a huge ass AC 130. Massacre is the way I was talking about. You can get some extra crit, but remember again, crits aren't super valuable on Ogryn unless you're using twin link stubber and what's it called? The one where when you get a crit, it reloads ammo from your magazine. You will need to have some base crit for that. And so if you're using that build with point blank barrage, definitely take Massacre. Big Boom is fun. There's a lot of really big booms, you know, here, Rumbler, all that stuff on Ogryn already. So having an extra 27.5 radius, I mean, I'm no math nerd, but increasing a radius makes the area of a circle a lot bigger, I think is the mathematical expression. So that's a big radius, and it's going to increase the amount of disruption you can do, which is always fun for Ogryns. Whatever. And then Burst Limit or Override. This is the Keystone I think needs the biggest rework. You know, having this random 8% chance is really just not something that I kind of like in Darktide. If this was 1 out of every 12 bullets, which is what that effectively comes out to, if this is 1 out of every 12 bullets will not consume ranged ammo, it'd be much more predictable. It'd be cool if it worked with things like single shot weapons where like 1 out of every 8 bullets will not consume the shot when you make the shot in the magazine or in the chamber. So you could like double shot, you know, your shotgun 1 out of every 12 times, and this would make it 1 out of every 8 times, right? It can give you guaranteed criticals, and it gives you ability cooldown when you get these lucky bullets. But remember, this is just not going to be that effective unless you're going full auto. And to be honest with you, the nodes to get to these other two keystones and these other two keystones themselves are so tempting. The problem with playing pure gun Ogryn is that you do find yourself very vulnerable to melee. These are the ways that you shore that up. So the most effective gun Ogryn builds I see do go hybrid and go for the keystones over here, and do not use Burst Limit or Override. So I'd like to see a little bit of a rework for it. Maybe we'll see that at some point in the future. All right, and then finally, guys, let's talk about the weapons. I think the weapons that the Ogryn is blessed with are quite good on the whole, which is great because the Ogryn has to use his own weapons, right? He doesn't get to use, you know, the chopstick version of the tiny little weapons that everybody else does, fighting enemies with a dueling sword like it's a fucking toothpick. His kickback is like the absolute sniper rifle shotgun combo that you've always wanted. It pulps enemies, like it just turns them to mist at nearly any range. For melee weapons, my favorite ones are the Bully Club and the Battle Maul, Slab, and Shield. These are great heavy attack weapons that are going to work really well with heavy hitter. They're super safe. They're great to keep up your toughness with. If you're more of a light attacker, I highly recommend the Delver's Pickaxe and the Cleaver. I think the Pickaxe, especially the Carsolus version of it, has become the real pick for light attack builds where you're just going to shred through everything, swinging this thing around like an absolute maniac. Other, you know, shoutouts for range weapons. Ripper guns are pretty good, though I don't think that they're as good as the kickback in my approximation. Stubbers are about the same as Ripper guns. You probably saw my ranged tier list. You know, they require you to set up and like actually fire for some amount of time. The kickback is just like, boom, you're dead. The Rumbler is probably my other favorite range weapon for the Ogryn, just because it can dump out these grenades that offer quite a lot of disruption to the battlefield. And I think that's something that Ogryn really excels in, is just breaking up enemy formations, making them have to deal with rolling around on the ground rather than actually fighting your allies. And it's also really useful to have some Rumbler tech where you can volley a grenade ahead of time and then wait for its delay to start picking up an ally or interacting with a console, so you don't take extra chip damage while you're doing that. So overall, how are we feeling about Ogryn? I think he is a great class. I love the fantasy of the Ogryn. I think they really nailed having this class that feels so much larger, whose size on the battlefield is really part of his weapon. The fact that he can just shove down like the biggest of enemies and push them around, whereas like a zealot or a veteran has to like run away and slide dodge to get out of the way of crushers, the Ogryn can just walk up to them and slam them in the nose with the shield, and then they'll fall down on the ground, and then he can just bludgeon them over the head while they're on the ground. I think that is so fun, in addition to just all of his skills really, well, most of his skills, feeling like they are built around like being with the team, being the team's sort of like, if not leader, like you are the one who is going to break the siege and like make the play that's going to like bust the enemy defenses wide open. You can make a lot of difference playing as Ogryn. My one caution would be it does require a different sort of subset of skills than the other 3 classes do, because there's different limits on what sort of like engagements you can participate in. Just because enemies are going to pick on you and shoot you to shit from a lot of ranges. If you are having problems with that, I highly recommend stacking Toughness Curios. It's helped me a lot, and I think it's generally recommended by the Ogronomicon as well. And that's one final thing I want to touch on before I go and get to talking about my members is go check out the Ogronomicon. If you have any interest in playing Ogryn, this helped me a lot, and I think it'll help you a lot too. And even if not, it's got a ton of valuable information, and look at the effort that went into this, by the way. Like, it deserves a read and a like on there. So there's that. And let's go ahead and show my members here on screen. Here they are. They are all very cool people. I just got a couple of new ones a day ago, and they are joining the ranks of very cool people. If you are a member, you get access to me at any time. You can send me an email and ask me to tweak your build or whatever it is. I'll even make videos, short videos that are private to members only, showing you how I would make tweaks or playing with your builds.